For 10,000 years, the Vorlath Dominion had ruled the stars with an iron fist. Their fleets had razed countless worlds, subjugated entire civilizations, and crushed every rebellion that dared to rise against their might. Across the known galaxy, their name was spoken with reverence and fear. To challenge them was to invite annihilation. Yet, in all their long history, the Vorlath had never known true terror. Until now. The alert came without warning. The ominous wail of the Red Protocol alarm echoed through the vast halls of Outpost 49, a heavily fortified military station orbiting Zareth 7, a swirling gas giant at the Dominion's outermost borders. Built to repel invasions and serve as a gateway to Vorlath space, the station had never been breached, never been tested in true battle. It was a fortress among the stars. And now, it had detected something unknown. The command center, a vast circular chamber lined with hollow panels and control consoles, was bathed in the harsh red glow of emergency lights. Officers scrambled to their stations, taloned fingers gliding over illuminated interfaces as they struggled to process the incoming data. Unidentified warship detected at the outer perimeter, the automated warning system announced, its cold synthetic voice resonating through the room. Supreme Commander Trelvok, a towering figure of scaled muscle and battle-worn scars, turned sharply toward the central display. A real-time tactical feed flickered before him, a three-dimensional representation of the sector. And there, emerging from the dark void beyond the system's outermost defense grid, was the anomaly, a single warship, larger than anything in the Dominion's databanks. For a brief moment, confusion rippled through the command staff. This was no ordinary encounter, no pirate fleet, no rogue mercenaries. The ship bore no recognizable insignia, no distinct energy signatures, no conventional weapons that their sensors could identify. It was as if a ghost had materialized from the abyss. Then, the scanners completed their analysis. Confirmed human vessel. A chilling silence swept over the room. The Terrans. To many, they were little more than a rumor, a primitive species that had emerged from the Sol system only a few centuries ago, expanding outward at a slow, deliberate pace. They had no empire, no vast interstellar dominion like the Vorlath. And yet, the mere mention of their kind sent ripples of unease through the galactic community. Their ships were never seen, only whispered about. There were stories, fleets that had vanished without a trace, battles that had ended before they had even begun. The few who had encountered Terran forces and survived spoke of technology that defied conventional understanding, of strategies so precise they bordered on the supernatural. And now, for the first time, one of their warships had entered Vorlath territory. Trelvok's slit-pupiled eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical readout. It made no sense. Most warships, especially those of the galactic superpowers, were designed with intimidation in mind. Vorlath dreadnoughts were adorned with crimson banners, jagged armor plating, and towering plasma turrets. The war fleets of the Zalratha hierarchy were ornate, their vessels covered in glowing runes and golden embellishments. Even the so-called peacekeeping ships of the Galactic Council radiated a kind of ceremonial authority. But this ship, it was silent, black, cold, a monolithic wedge of reinforced alloys, its surface smooth and unbroken by the usual protrusions of a warship. No visible turrets, no external thrusters, no reactor glow. It was a void in space, absorbing the surrounding light rather than reflecting it. And yet, mass readings indicated it was a capital-class warship, nearly 5 kilometers in length. It dwarfed even the largest Vorlath battlecruisers, but there were no life signs aboard. Trelvok's claws drummed against the console. That's impossible. Every known species left some trace of their crew. Heat signatures, biological markers, at the very least an oxygen-rich atmosphere within the hull. But this ship registered nothing. It was as if it were a ghost ship, an unmanned construct drifting silently through space. And then, without warning, the ship moved, a single, imperceptible shift, so fast that the sensors struggled to track it. A moment ago, it had been on the edge of the system. Now, it was directly within their defensive perimeter. No FTL signature, No sublight propulsion detected. It had simply jumped. A wave of unease rippled through the command center. Even Trelvok, a veteran of countless wars, felt an instinctual chill creep up his spine. This was no ordinary warship. Then, a single transmission came through. The speakers crackled, filling the chamber with a deep, commanding voice. One that was undeniably human. This sector is now under Terran jurisdiction. You have one chance to surrender. Resist, and you will be annihilated. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Every officer turned toward Trelvok, waiting for his response. The very idea of surrender was unthinkable. No one had ever threatened the Vorlath Dominion. No one had ever dared to challenge their rule. And yet, this lone warship, silent, unmoving, had done so with nothing more than a simple declaration. Trelvok's upper lip curled into a sneer. They think they can intimidate us? His voice was low, venomous. He turned to his second-in-command. Send word to the fleet, full battle formations. If these Terrans want a fight, we will give them one. The command center burst into motion. Fleet-wide orders were issued. The full weight of the Vorlath Armada was about to descend upon this intruder. The Dominion had never lost a war. They had never met a force they could not crush. But today, that was about to change. The unseen power of the Terrans, the Vorlath fleet, mobilized with terrifying speed. Within minutes, the entire Zareth 7 Defense Armada, a battle-hardened force numbering over 50 warships, had locked onto the intruding vessel. Dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, and swarms of heavily armed frigates formed a lethal blockade, their weapons trained on the solitary Terran warship. The fleet's commander, Supreme Warlord Kareth Zul, watched, from the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath. His voice was filled with disdain. One ship dares to challenge us? A cruel chuckle rumbled through his chest. The Vorlath Dominion had obliterated entire planetary defense grids with far less firepower. The idea that a single Terran vessel, no matter how advanced, could withstand the full might of a battle fleet was absurd. But something felt wrong. The human warship had not moved since issuing its ultimatum. No evasive maneuvers. No sign of defensive posturing. It simply remained motionless in the void, as if the threat of annihilation did not concern it in the slightest. Zul's second-in-command, Trek Voth, his scales tinged with uncertainty, glanced at the tactical display. Sir, something is off. It's not responding to our targeting locks. Its shields aren't even active. It's just sitting there. Zul snorted. A bluff. A pathetic, desperate bluff. They must think their reputation alone is enough to intimidate us. He stepped forward and bared his fangs in amusement. They are wrong. He raised his command staff high. Fire! Instantly the Vorlath fleet unleashed hell. Plasma lances, antimatter, torpedoes, and high-yield fusion warheads erupted from the assembled armada, streaking across the void toward the solitary Terran warship. The darkness of space was illuminated by a cataclysm of destruction. Thousands of warheads detonating in unison. The sheer thermal energy of the barrage was enough to turn an entire moon to slag, a direct hit. The Terran ship vanished in fire. A victorious cheer erupted across the Vorlath bridge. The Dominion's Wrath's crew celebrated, already preparing to broadcast their swift victory to the Dominion's high command. The Terran threat had been obliterated in a single strike. But then, the smoke cleared, and the warship was still there. Untouched. Not a single scorch mark on its hull. Silence fell. Over the bridge, Zul's blood ran cold. Impossible, Trekvoth whispered, his voice barely audible. Zul's mind raced. The fleet's combined firepower should have been enough to shatter a planet, let alone a single warship. But the Terran vessel remained completely intact, as if the weapons had simply ceased to exist upon impact. Then, their sensors flickered, reporting something even more terrifying. The ship was no longer in front of them. A proximity alert blared. It was behind them. It had moved in an instant. No warp signature. No FTL wake. It had simply jumped, without traversing the space in between. For the first time in his life, Zul felt something foreign grip his chest. Fear. How? The ship had ignored their weapons. It had ignored the laws, of physics themselves. It was playing with them. And then, the transmission came through once more. The same deep, unwavering voice. You were warned. For the first time in millennia, the Vorlath Dominion had become the prey. The warship's hull, previously silent and featureless, now shifted. Weapons emerged. They were unlike anything in the Vorlath's vast archives of warfare. These were not plasma cannons, railguns, or traditional energy weapons. They were pure anomalies. Dark, shifting structures that bent and rippled against the void itself. Reality itself seemed to twist around them. And then, they fired. Not with light. Not with heat, with absence. Space itself seemed to collapse around the nearest Vorlath battleships, their forms crushed into nothingness in an instant. The Dominion's Wrath's crew watched in horror as 3 of their strongest warships simply ceased to exist, as if they had been erased from reality. There were no explosions, no wreckage, no energy signatures. They were just gone. Panic erupted across the fleet. What kind of weapon is that? Zul staggered back, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. He had faced dozens of alien races. He had seen plasma storms, antimatter bombs, neutron cannons. But nothing like this. The Terrans weren't using conventional weapons. They were using something far beyond the Dominion's understanding. Trek Voth's voice was filled with terror. Sir, we need to retreat. This isn't a battle. It's an execution. Zul clenched his fists, his pride battling against his survival instincts. But deep down, he knew. The Vorlath fleet had no chance. No amount of firepower, strategy, or technology could counter something they could not even understand. And the Terrans had only just begun. The wrath of a silent god. The Vorlath fleet was crumbling. Minute ago, Supreme Warlord Kareth Zul had stood at the helm of a vast, unstoppable armada. Now, half his fleet was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. The Dominion's Wrath's sensors flickered in and out, struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. Entire warships vanished from existence, not in fiery explosions, but as if they had never been there at all. Some ships seemed to fall into themselves, their metallic hulls folding and twisting before imploding into black voids. Others simply blinked out of reality. No wreckage, no debris. Just silence. Zul gripped the edge of his command console, his claws digging into the metal. He had faced planetary rebellions. He had led orbital bombardments that wiped out entire civilizations. But now, he was powerless. A garbled transmission broke through the bridge's chaos. This is the dreadnought scourge of Zalnath. We've lost all engine control. Our weapons are malfunctioning. Reality is static. The Gi. Signal cut out. The scourge of Zalnath, one of the Dominion's most powerful warships, simply disappeared. Trek Voth, his normally confident demeanor shattered, turned to Zul. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of their doom. We can't fight this, Supreme Warlord. This isn't technology. It's something else. Zul snarled, refusing to believe it. The Dominion was supreme. The Terrans were mere primitives, weren't they? He turned to his tactical officer. Find a weakness. Scan their ship. The officer's scaled fingers trembled over the controls as he worked. The warship loomed on the screen, a monolithic silhouette of absolute dread. Then, the readings came in. The entire bridge fell silent. No energy output. No heat signatures. Nothing. It wasn't just shielded. It wasn't there. Trek Voth's mandibles clicked in fear. That's impossible. Zul's chest tightened. It wasn't a ship. It was something else. Then the human transmission returned. The same calm, emotionless voice. We gave you a chance to leave. And then it moved, not through space, through something else. One moment it was thousands of kilometers away. The next, it was inside the Dominion's formation, its shape flickering like a mirage. The Vorlath warships panicked. A dreadnought fired its entire payload of planet-cracking antimatter torpedoes at point-blank range. They struck the human vessel, and simply vanished. The torpedoes had never existed. Then, the retaliation came. The Terran warship's weapons shifted again, reshaping into impossible structures. Not cannons, not missiles, but something living. Dark tendrils of pure void energy erupted from its hull, latching onto the nearest Vorlath battlecruiser. The moment they touched, time seemed to fracture. The ship's crew aged 1,000 years in an instant. Through the ship's open comms, Zul could hear their screams. Then, the ship itself disintegrated into dust, its particles scattering into the abyss. More Vorlath ships tried to escape, activating their FTL drives, warping away in terror. But they didn't go anywhere. Their ships flickered, their warp fields unraveling like mist. They had tried to flee, but they had never left. The Terrans had trapped them. Panic spread through the fleet. "We have to surrender," one officer pleaded. Zul's mind raced. Surrender? No. The Dominion did not surrender. They would fight to the last. Ship. To the last breath. His hands trembled as he sent out a final command. "All remaining ships, concentrate fire. Focus all weapons on that thing." The Vorlath fleet fired everything. Hundreds of plasma lances, nuclear warheads, tachyon disruptors, and graviton imploders detonated against the human warship's hull. The entire sector burned as weapons designed to crack open planets unleashed. Their fury. For a moment, hope surged. For a moment, Zul dared to believe. But then, the warship spoke again. "Is that all?" Zul's stomach dropped. The ship hadn't taken a single scratch. A cold realization settled over the Supreme Warlord. This wasn't a warship. This was something else entirely. A harbinger. A reaper. The Vorlath Dominion was doomed, and the humans had only just begun. The devouring shadow, the Vorlath fleet was dying. No, not dying. Being erased. Every battle the Dominion had fought, every species they had conquered, every warship they had built, none of it mattered anymore. The human warship hadn't even moved. It simply existed, and unmade reality around it. Zul's breathing was ragged, his massive frame shaking. His kind was built for war, bred from the strongest genetic stock of the Dominion's warlords. But now, he was nothing more than a frightened beast staring into the abyss. "All ships, fall back," he barked, desperation seeping into his voice. "Regroup at Rally Point Zethra, now!" His command was met with static. Zul's eyes flicked to the fleet tracker. His remaining forces were shrinking. Not because they were being destroyed, but because they were disappearing, erased from the records, as if they had never existed at all. Trekvoth stared at him, eyes wide with horror. "This isn't war," the second-in-command whispered. "This is a culling." A tremor ran through the Dominion's wrath as the human warship finally moved. Not forward, not sideways. Everywhere. The colossal construct blurred, its form shifting between dimensions, phasing in and out of existence like a mirage. One moment it was kilometers away, the next it was close enough to engulf the Dominion's wrath in its shadow. Then, the whispering began. Zul froze. The bridge lights flickered as a deep, bone-chilling murmur crawled through the ship. A sound, not heard by ears, but felt inside the mind. At first, it was unintelligible, a chorus of broken echoes. Then, it took shape. A voice. A human voice. "You should have left." A sharp crack split through the command deck. Zul turned. One of his officers was writhing on the ground, claws tearing at his own skull. "Make it stop!" the officer screamed. "They're inside my mind!" More crew members collapsed, clutching their heads. Their eyes rolled back, voices babbling nonsense. Some fell silent, staring into nothingness. Zul's blood ran cold. He turned to his psionic dampeners. The Dominion was used to dealing with telepathic threats. They had conquered countless mind-wielding species, but the safeguards were failing. Readings spiked off the charts. The dampeners were active, but they weren't blocking anything. The human warship wasn't attacking them with psionics. It was rewriting them. Trekvoth's claws trembled over his console. "Supreme Warlord, our entire fleet, our history, our archives, they're changing." Zul turned to the display in disbelief. The Vorlath Dominion's war records were shifting. Battles they had won were gone, wiped from existence. Entire planets they had conquered never existed. Even their own empire's history was unraveling, before their eyes. The Terrans weren't just destroying them, they were removing them from reality itself. Zul's vision blurred. This was impossible. A single ship, rewriting the fabric of history? His claws dug into his seat. No, he refused to accept this. If the Dominion was to fall, then they would fall fighting. He turned to his remaining officers, his voice a growl. Prepare the Onyx Protocol. Trekvoth's head snapped toward him, horrified. You can't be serious. We have no choice, Zul roared. We will not be forgotten. The Onyx Protocol was the final measure. A last-ditch failsafe, a weapon never meant to be used. Deep within the Dominion's wrath, a series of sealed chambers unlocked. Rows upon rows of containment cells, housing the most forbidden weapons of the Dominion. The ship's AI chirped a final warning. Onyx Protocol activated. Prepare for total reality destabilization. A pulse of dark energy rippled through the ship. The hull groaned, the fabric of space twisting unnaturally. Then, the human warship stopped. For the first time, it hesitated. The whispers faded. The eerie presence diminished. Zul grinned savagely. That's right, he snarled. Even you don't understand what we're about to unleash. The Dominion's greatest secret. A weapon stolen from a species so ancient, so powerful, that the mere knowledge of it had been buried beneath layers of secrecy. A weapon that even the Vorlath themselves feared to wield. And now, it was about to be set free. Zul slammed the final command. Fire the Black Rift! The ship's core ignited. Reality tore open. A rift, a hole in the very fabric of existence, erupted before them. A swirling vortex of pure entropy. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was an unraveling of cause and effect. A singularity that erased everything it touched from the past, present, and future. The human warship would not survive this. Nothing would. Zul stared into the void, watching as the warship's massive, impenetrable hull was caught in the Black Rift's pull. Now, Zul whispered, let's see what gods bleed. And then the impossible happened. The warship moved, not away, not forward. It moved in time. 1 second it was being pulled into the rift. The next, it was behind them. Untouched. The rift was gone. Zul's mind fractured. That wasn't possible. The rift was supposed to be eternal. A hole in reality itself. But the humans had simply closed it. Like a child snuffing out a candle. Zul turned, horror clawing at his mind. The human warship was there, waiting. It had allowed him to make his move. And now, it was time for its move. The transmission came through again, the same calm voice. That was interesting. Then, now it's our turn. The Dominion's wrath shook violently. Zul could feel it. Time itself collapsing around them. The warship had played with them. It had toyed with their weapons, tested their knowledge, watched them struggle, like an experiment. But now, it was ending the experiment. The Vorlath fleet had no chance. Zul realized the truth too late. The humans weren't just powerful, they were beyond understanding, and the Dominion was already gone. The erasure of an empire. There were no explosions, no alarms, no screams, just silence. A silence that crept into every deck of the Dominion's wrath, crawling into Zul's bones, whispering through the ship like a dying breath. The battle was over. Not in a way that Zul had ever imagined, but in a way that unmade reality itself. The human warship had spoken, and now the Vorlath Dominion was ceasing to exist. Zul staggered forward, his claws gripping the side of his command console. His vision blurred as data streams flickered and warped. The fleet? Gone. Not destroyed. Not even debris remained. It was as if the Vorlath ships had never been there. Trekvoth collapsed beside him, his wide reptilian eyes filled with terror. His breathing was shallow, his body trembling. Zul, he rasped. Do you feel it? Zul did. The weight of existence shifting. The knowledge of things that should have been slipping through his mind like grains of sand. He turned to the central, hollow display. The Vorlath Dominion's star maps were changing. Planets they had ruled for centuries were now empty voids. No colonies, no records, no history. Their homeworld, Vothkai, gone, not destroyed, simply missing. Zul's blood ran cold. He reached for the ship's archive, frantically searching for any proof that his people had existed. There was nothing. The historical logs were rewriting themselves, not by deletion, by absence. As if the Vorlath had never been written into the pages of the cosmos. Trekvoth let out a shuddering breath. Zul. What if we're the last ones left? Zul's claws tightened into a trembling fist. The human warship hovered in the abyss, not advancing, not attacking, just watching, like an entity beyond time, beyond consequence. Then the voice returned, calm, steady. We gave you a chance to leave. Zul bared his fangs, rage and despair coiling inside him. What are you? What have you done to us? For the first time, the warship answered. We are humanity, and we are not kind to those who would erase us. A memory surfaced in Zul's fading mind, a forgotten warning. A small, insignificant species once thought weak, one that had fought wars with enemies far greater than themselves, one that had survived extinction again and again. The last words of a dying alien ambassador echoed in his skull. Do not provoke them. Do not corner them. Do not force their hand. If you do, you will cease to be. The Dominion had ignored the warning. Now, they were the warning. Zul felt his own consciousness slipping, his very thoughts unraveling. No pain, just nothingness. His last sight was the human warship vanishing into the black void, as if it had never been there at all, as if it had never needed to be. And then, Zul was gone. A century later, deep within an ancient archive, an alien historian studied the galactic records. His fingers traced the holographic timelines, searching for traces of lost empires. There was a gap, an anomaly. Between the rise of the great starfaring civilizations, there should have been mention of a warlord species. Vast empire built on conquest and bloodshed, but there was nothing. As if a species had been written out of history itself. The historian frowned, his tendrils curling in curiosity. Strange, he murmured to himself. There should have been something here. A name. A battle. A war. Yet the records were blank. He sighed and moved on, dismissing it as an error of time. Some things, after all, were simply meant to be forgotten.